The bright lights of Madison Square Garden illuminated the ring, the crowd roaring as fists flew, and the sound of leather gloves thudded with every strike. This was the world of Hurricane Carter, a professional middleweight boxer with a solid record, known for his aggressive style and fierce determination in the ring. By the mid-1960s, Carter had made a name for himself as a contender, a fighter not to be taken lightly. But for all his fame and skill in the sport, no one could have predicted that his biggest fight would not be in the ring, but in the courtroom, and later, in the confines of a prison cell. It was a warm June night in 1966 when Carter and his friend, John Artis, were out enjoying themselves. The two had been sparring partners for years, and after a training session, they decided to relax at a local bar called The Night Spot in Paterson, New Jersey. The atmosphere was lively, the drinks were flowing, and the two men enjoyed each other's company. As the evening wore on, they decided to head home, unaware that their lives were about to be turned upside down. Around the same time, just half a mile away, another scene was unfolding. Two men entered the Lafayette Bar and Grill with guns drawn. Shots rang out, chaos erupted, and when the smoke cleared, 3 people lay dead, 2 customers and the bartender. A 4th, badly injured, was rushed to the hospital. The attackers fled the scene in a white Chevrolet, leaving behind a trail of devastation. As police rushed to the scene, they questioned witnesses, including 2 men who had been lurking around the bar, Alfred Bello and Arthur Bradley. The 2 men were petty criminals, known for their shady dealings, and on this particular night, they had seized the opportunity to rob the cash register in the midst of the chaos. Despite their questionable actions, they told the police they had seen 2 black men, around 5'11", fleeing in a white Chevrolet. And so, the search for the killers began. A few minutes later, Carter and Artis, driving home in Carter's white Dodge, were pulled over by police. Though they didn't match the description, Carter was much more solidly built than the men described, and neither he nor Artis were 5'11". The police detained them. Carter's reputation as a fighter, his brash attitude, and the fact that he was black in a racially charged America made him an easy target for suspicion. The 2 men were taken to the Lafayette Bar, where the shaken witnesses could not identify them as the attackers. They were then brought to the hospital, where the injured survivor also failed to recognize them. With no positive identifications, the police had no choice but to release them. But this wasn't the end. Over the following months, as pressure mounted to solve the case, the police turned their attention back to Bello and Bradley. Facing their own legal troubles, the 2 men were offered deals, early parole, overlooked crimes, and a hefty reward of $112,000 if they could positively identify Carter and Artis as the shooters. Suddenly, their memories became crystal clear. They were now absolutely certain that Carter and Artis were the men they had seen fleeing the scene that night. In 1967, based on this testimony, Carter and Artis were arrested and put on trial for the murders. The racial tensions of the time were palpable. This was, after all, the height of the civil rights movement, and Paterson, New Jersey, was not immune to the deeply entrenched racism that plagued much of the country. The trial was a travesty of justice from the start. The all-white jury was more than ready to believe the worst about 2 black men accused of killing white people, especially with the sensationalized narrative of a racial revenge plot concocted by the prosecution. Despite a lack of physical evidence and the shaky credibility of the witnesses, Carter and Artis were convicted. Artis received a sentence of 15 years to life, while Carter, because of his perceived leadership role in the crime, was sentenced to 30 years to life. It was a crushing blow. Carter's career was over, his future seemingly snatched away by a system that saw him as little more than a scapegoat. But Hurricane Carter wasn't one to go down without a fight. From his prison cell, Carter began a relentless campaign to prove his innocence. He spent his days poring over legal books, writing appeals, and reaching out to anyone who would listen. His case started to attract attention, first from public defenders in New Jersey and then from the media, including the New York Times. As journalists and legal experts dug deeper, they uncovered troubling details about how Bello and Bradley had been pressured and bribed into giving false testimony. It became clear that Carter and Artis had been railroaded by a justice system eager to close the case, regardless of the truth. Carter also penned his autobiography from prison, detailing his life and the injustices he had faced. The book captured the public's attention, and soon celebrities and activists rallied around his cause. Bob Dylan was so moved by Carter's story that he wrote the song "Hurricane," which became a top 40 hit and brought national attention to the boxer's plight. Muhammad Ali, always an advocate for civil rights, joined the fight as well, leading protests and using his platform to demand justice for Carter. By 1976, after years of relentless effort, Carter's case made its way to the New Jersey Supreme Court. The court overturned his conviction, citing the blatant misconduct by the prosecution and the dubious testimony of the witnesses. Carter and Artis were released on bail, awaiting a new trial. For the first time in nearly a decade, they tasted freedom. But the fight wasn't over. 9 months later, the retrial began, and once again, Bellow and Bradley took the stand, repeating their false accusations. This time, however, the prosecution added a new inflammatory argument, claiming that the murders were part of a black power plot to kill white people in retaliation for the racial injustices of the time. The absurdity of the claim was lost on the jury, and Carter and Artis were once again convicted and sent back to prison. It seemed as though Carter's battle was lost, but he refused to give up. Finally, in 1985, after 19 years of incarceration, a federal judge reviewed Carter's case. The judge found that the prosecution had engaged in egregious misconduct, manipulating the racial tensions of the era to secure a conviction. The judge ruled that Carter and Artis had been denied a fair trial, and their convictions were overturned. After nearly 2 decades, Hurricane Carter was a free man. Carter didn't waste his second chance at life. He dedicated himself to fighting for others who had been wrongfully convicted, founding an organization called Innocence International. John Artis, his friend and co-defendant, joined him in the cause, and together they worked to ensure that others would not suffer the same fate they had. Hurricane Carter's story is not just one of injustice and perseverance. It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of truth. Despite the years stolen from him, Carter remained a fighter to the end, not just for himself, but for those who had no voice.